Communications, a political advocacy agency. And I've served in this political campaigning space for a number of years, having served as a national political director for Bernie Sanders in 2016 and serving in senior roles for state and local campaigns across Kansas and Missouri. I'm also the founder of Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet, a nonpartisan nonprofit named for the legacy of Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman elected to Congress and the first Black woman to run for president on a major party ticket. Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet works to amplify the voices and power of Black women through education and advocacy right here in Kansas City. If you'd like to learn more about our work, you can visit us at www.shirleyskitchencabinet.org. I am so elated to have been given the prestigious opportunity to be a fellow at the Dole Institute, an institution of learning named for Congressman Robert Dole, but I'm also excited to have been invited by the executive director, Bill Lacey. And so I will hand the mic over to Bill Lacey to give some remarks as we embark on our final discussion group series for this session for fall 2021.
Cannot hear. Dale, are you there? Hello?
Thank you so much for those remarks, Bill. As you all may or may not be aware, this is Bill's last year serving as the executive director of the Dole Institute. And so we are sad to see him transition into something else, but so grateful for all of the work that he's done to make the Dole Institute one of the premier institutes of politics right here in our state of Kansas, right here in the Kansas and Missouri region, and one of the most revered institute of politics across the United States. So with that, just a few housekeeping items. The Dole Institute has worked diligently to ensure that its journey into the digital age is one that is seamless, as we are seeing today, since I am joining you hybrid, and some of our guests will be not only in person, but also virtual. The Dole Institute is also live streaming this session, and you can find the live stream on YouTube at the Dole Institute. But those of you who are like me, who are joining us virtually, you can join in on the conversation by sending your questions to dolequestions@ku.edu. And we'll get to answer all of the questions that we can at the end during our Q&A session. So to start off with intros, I'd like to start with Abbie Hodgson. Abbie is the director of the Ascend Fund, a collaborative fund dedicated to accelerating the pace of change towards gender parity in U.S. politics. Under Abbie's great leadership, the Ascend Fund has invested over $6 million, with an M, dollars to build a pathway for more women to run for office and win. Abbie's career in politics spans more than 2 decades, during which time she has worked on more than 100 campaigns in Kansas and across the nation. Thank you so much for joining us, Abbie.
Thanks for having me.
Next, we have Annie Presley. Annie Presley is a political strategist who has taken on crucial roles in national and political campaigns, having even served on the George W. Bush for President campaign as a national deputy political director of finance from 1999 to 2001. Fun fact, she also served on the Dole campaign for president, and I will let you talk a little bit about that. After some 30 years working in fundraising and political consulting, Annie is now the co author of three recently published books that deal with issues surrounding childhood, marriage, and death. Thank you for joining us, Annie.
Thank you.
Next, we have Donna Davis. Donna is a seasoned community and political organizer with more than 20 years of campaign management experience. In 2019 and 2020, Donna was a national director, political director, on Amy Klobuchar's presidential primary ballot access team. She continued election year work directing field operations throughout Florida to elect President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Currently, Donna is leading a field operation in Minneapolis, Minnesota, focusing on ushering in a new era of policing and public safety. Thank you for joining us, Donna. And last but not least, we have Tezlyn Figaro, an award-winning political and communication strategist. Tezlyn is the host of the Straight Shot No Chaser podcast on Charlemagne the God's Black Effect Podcast Network on the largest radio audio platform in America, iHeartRadio. Tezlyn is also a political contributor seen daily in more than 55 million, with an M, households on the national Black News 24-hour cable news channel. And she also serves as a strategist for one of Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People, attorney Benjamin Crump. Thank you so much for joining us, Tezlyn. Excited to have you here today. Excited to have all of you. Thank you all for joining me for the discussion. War Room 2022, a forecast of what to expect in politics in 2022 going forward. So over the last 6 weeks, we've discussed a number of issues impacting politics: social media, the pandemic, Black women, President's 45, 46, states being flipped. And we're really lucky in that the timing could not have been better, with so many key state and local elections occurring last night, for us to forecast what to expect in 2022. With governor races, statewide executive seats such as lieutenant governor seats, to state house races, to state senate races, local municipal and school board races across New York, Boston, and even right here in Kansas. A lot happened last night that could shape or change the trajectory of politics in 2022 and beyond. So if we start at the top of the ballot, I'd like to start with you, Annie. Who were the big winners in last night's gubernatorial elections on the East Coast and across the nation?
Well, clearly the Virginia race was the one across the country everybody was paying the most attention to. And it was a close race, but the outcome was different than the pollsters had suggested. So that was a biggie for Youngton to come out over Terry McAuliffe. There were several other gubernatorial races that were interesting, but none more interesting than Virginia.
Yeah, the New Jersey race is also very close, and could be a toss-up depending on how those different votes come in. Tezlyn, I will kick the same question over to you with the governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey and other key races at the top of the ticket across the nation. Who were last night's big winners?
No, I don't know. It depends on who's looking at it, on who is going to determine who is the big winner. Obviously, people that lose feel that they were the ones that are considered the big winner, but obviously the math just didn't work out. I said last night that running a campaign is about the math, and not about the math, but about the motivation. So when you look at Virginia, and it is a majority Democratic state, but yet Republican voters were more motivated to get out, it is a clear view of what we can expect in 2022. But we also want to be very clear that we also always can include historical data. And historically, Virginia does normally vote against whatever what sitting power is in Congress, except when McAuliffe ran and won in 2014. So there's a lot to unpack there, but there were also, I think, what a lot of people are not really focusing on as much as I think that they should, is races like in Atlanta, where Keisha Lance Bottoms, her race was last night, that we all know that she has decided not to run. And so there was an upset there in Atlanta with a runoff now being held between two candidates, and I believe it was over 7 candidates that ran for that seat. So there was a lot going on local, and we obviously know with New York and the New York mayor, that was pretty much a given. We knew that was going to go towards Adams' way. But the main highlight of that New York race is that he will be the protocol for, at least that's what they're determining, the protocol for 2022. So that's important and impactful as we unpack this discussion.
I think that's important to note the role of local races and the impact, the potential impact that they could have on elections in 2022. There was a mayoral race in New York. There was one in Boston where Boston elected its first woman mayor, Asian American woman by Michelle Wu, who won that election there. Even here in Kansas, in Wyandotte County, the now elected mayor, Tyrone Gardner, is going to be the first Black mayor in Wyandotte County, Kansas, was elected last night. I will open this question up to the entire panel, but particularly Donna and Abbie. What are your thoughts on the role of the elections that took place at the more local level and municipal level, even at the school board level across the nation, and what impact they could possibly have on elections to come in 2022?
Well, I got to play in Minneapolis, and the world was watching us, and it was a brutal left versus left race. When we went into Minneapolis, the folks there were distraught. They didn't really know what would solve their problems. And what I saw was a replay of what we've done in Florida over the last, I've only been in Florida, I'm a Florida native, but I've only been back in Florida from New York City for 7 years now. And I watch our hyper-left segment of our party go over and over the same mistakes. And so what the Democratic Party did in Minnesota was they latched on to the defund and abolish language without a clear understanding of any significant depth of what that meant. And what ended up happening was all of the people on the left championed that, and they called in the big dogs. They called in Ben and Jerry's and the ACLU and the Color of Change, and suddenly, you know, dyed-in-the-wool, lifelong Democrat, I feel like I'm fighting my own people, right? And we couldn't say to them what happens when they rehire 70% of these police officers back into an agency that just simply has a new name. And we lose the reform aspect of this, the real reform. Any penetrating reform aspect of this is lost in the idea that the police are gone, when really nothing of the sort has happened. And so I watch us around the country use language and latch on to these pop cultural notions that lack depth. And if they lack depth, you know, ultimately they will lack impact. On the McAuliffe race, I ran a massive field operation in 2013 in the Tidewater of Virginia. And the idea then was that Ken Cuccinelli, who he ran against, would destroy or allow big industries to come in and do terrible things to the low-lying, very valuable environmental ecosystems down in the Tidewater. And McAuliffe was very vocal and very detailed. He captivated the imagination of people who loved Virginia. Virginia is very beautiful, lots of unspoiled land down there that we don't want to mess up. And people listened to him, and it was a narrow victory, but he was able to win. It was hard for me to listen over the din of the fighting in Minneapolis, but I could not hear a concise message that spoke to the zeitgeist of this moment coming out of that campaign. So I was not surprised at all about what happened. And plus I got emails every single day, several times a day for money. So I knew they were in trouble.
Well, all campaigns need money. That is a thing. But I think you raised an interesting point about messaging, particularly around defunding the police. There was a measure that I think you're speaking to that was on the ballot, a referendum to replace or restructure the police department that failed in Minnesota. although Minnesota is where the flashpoint for the George Floyd protests occurred with the murder of George Floyd. Tezlyn, I will kick it back to you quickly. Can you talk more about the role of messaging in the races in Virginia and other key issues and messages around those issues that might have impacted the races, both in Virginia and New York, and resulted in the election results that we saw last night?
Yeah, I'll just kind of piggyback on what my co-panelist just said on the infighting within the left, or I guess you can say the far left and the left. One of the things that Michelle didn't have a chance to mention in my bio, but just for transparency, I serve as a senior advisor for the George Floyd Foundation. I was with that family day one when that tragedy hit. So being able to work with that family and see the attention brought to the world with working with Attorney Crump and all of his cases over the last decade, and how that messaging has really morphed into something that has been very unclear. I don't know who came up with the strategy or the slogan defund the police. I'm still trying to figure that out. If anybody knows, please let me know. But whoever came up with that message, people just kind of ran with it, and in agreeing with my co-panelists, the messaging has never really been clear. It's always been a way of saying that no, we're trying to take away from the police instead of really restructuring and putting things in place. So Minnesota, and I know you asked about other races, but I did just want to piggyback on that. Minnesota definitely blow to those who have been on the ground and have been fighting to say, listen, the people want to see a better police unit. And so to have that measure voted down handedly certainly put a lack of morale this morning into those who, actually work on the ground, are activists, are organizers, and so forth. And you can pretty much see that the message is being sent, again, pointing back to Eric Adams' race, where they're saying, listen, the message for 2022 needs to be tough on crime. We need to stop talking about the slogans of defund the police. We need to talk more about, moderate issues, or what they call, quote unquote, table discussion issues, where people really can see the difference. And so right now, again, I'm the host of Straight Shot No Chaser, so Michelle, I don't like to talk in circles. Bottom line, the left is a mess right now. There's not a clear strategy. The messaging is not on where it should be. It's not pointing to where people can actually feel the result of their vote. A lot of things are being done when we talk about the $300 people are receiving every month, from this administration. That wasn't talked about. So the messaging is all over the place. It's not consistent. Republicans have always done a great job of, whether I like the messaging or not, and just for everybody in the room knowing, I am independent. I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. But Republicans have always done a better job of driving their message home. Whether people agree with it or not, they stick to it and they pound the pavement with it, and it makes a difference. And folks on the left just have not been able to come up with a consensus because there's some house cleaning that needs to be done in the Democrat Party, which I think is a good thing.
Well, if we even stick to messaging, if you look at what happened with down ballot races in 2020, there were Democrats who, at the state and local levels, believed that their inability to maybe win their seats was due to messaging around defunding the police. But I think if you look at outside of top of ticket races, or the gubernatorial races in New Jersey and Virginia, where messaging may have encourage Republican voters to come out, we still saw big wins for Democrats at the local level and mayoral races across the country. Again, here in Wyandotte County, we saw the election of the first Black mayoral candidate. We saw the first Black woman elected to the Lawrence Commissioner's office and seats with Amber Sellers. There were a lot of big wins down the ballot. Abbie, you have worked in Kansas politics for quite a while. What do you attribute to the election results that we saw in Kansas last night?
Yeah, so it's really interesting to look across the state and see the diversity of candidates that are elected, really dependent upon the level of civic engagement and activity of the voters in particular areas. So over in Johnson County, there's a great divide, depending on which town you live in, between whether your school board went conservative or whether it remained more moderate. Unsurprisingly, COVID and mask mandates, issues over vaccines, online in-person teaching, as well as critical race theory, which I just want to acknowledge is not being taught in any K-12 schools in Kansas, but was still a really prevalent issue in driving conservative voters boards.
No, I think that's important to know. So if we bring it back to the top of the ticket, Annie, I'll take it back to you. Earlier, you mentioned that there was a lot of focus on the elections in Virginia. As we know, Terry McAuliffe was not able to pull off the win, but a number of candidates running down ballot for state seats in Virginia also lost those seats. Democrats in particular, and saw those seats split. Why was there so much focus on the races in Virginia? And is that any indication of what we can expect moving forward in 2022?
The Virginia race was pretty important because McAuliffe had been governor before. You can't run consecutively there, and so he had an opportunity to run again. He was running clearly against Trump. He brought out all the big guns, Biden, Obama. Stacey Abrams came up and campaigned for him. He ran a hard Democratic race, raised a ton of money, and really just ran against Trump. And it was kind of a classic race, actually. And the reason why it was important nationally is because you want to see whether or not that's going to work. I mean, if you run against Trump, is it going to work? And as it turns out, I think the Trump fatigue has set in. And Tezlyn, you kind of hit on it, but people are just sort of, there are Trumpers, they still exist. But the loudmouth bullying baloney that comes with it has tailed off in large part because they've turned off of social media, but also because people have just gotten tired of it. And I think the McAuliffe effort to use that as his primary target was sort of a fail. And the voters were motivated more by educational issues. They were motivated by what's happening in their own backyards and far less about Trump. So the other thing that's interesting about Virginia, it's in a weird time. It's in an off year when it's not really considered a midterm election. And oftentimes it is predictive of what is to come. So that's why it got so much attention. The former Clinton guy, McAuliffe, an Obama guy, and he's running against Trump. And so it tells a lot about what's coming and what kind of race you need to run.
No, I think that it's almost providing the tea leaves, so to speak, for us to read about what to expect. But you said something interesting that he ran against Trump, but from where I sat and what I was able to witness and see, it seemed that he ran against Trump as a personality, but a lot of the same issues that Trump supporters or Republicans in general would be for or encouraged to come out and vote for were the issues that he ran on. Donna, I will turn it to you, and then Tezlyn, can you talk more about what it looks like for Republicans to run against Trump, and then what are the issues that Democrats needed to talk about, or maybe the issues and messaging that was missed that may have or could have resulted in different election results last night?
Well, I remember in Florida, when we were shocked. I saw the returns coming in. This is 2016, and I called a friend in Missouri. And I said, Chris, I think Trump is going to win. And he says, oh, that's not possible. And did you look at the counties that have come in? I think the returns from the largest. I said, no. Rubio is crushing it. And I think that is a harbinger of the tide in the electoral race. He says, no. And he's a numbers guy. He's a Nate Silver type, right? So he started crunching his numbers. And I said, no, I think I know what I'm talking about here. So a couple hours later, he called me back and he was like, what every expletive you can think of, And I see people continue to be shocked about a lot of these things. But from my perspective as a Black woman, they said, someone said to me, it's going to take a couple of days for us to really see like how people voted. And as it turned out, the reason why Andrew Gillum isn't the governor of Florida right now had to do with black women. There was a defection amongst black women around the issue of education and vouchers. Nobody was paying attention to that. The same way no one pays attention to the evangelical movement in Latin communities in Central and South Florida. There are so many things that are happening simultaneously. It's easy to look at Virginia and say, oh, Virginia is a bellwether, but takes a little bit more rigor to really look at what's happening in these individual districts. Case in point, I was in HD 79 around Labor Day. Steve Heretic, the incumbent, being primaried on all sides, multiples are coming for this seat. He's upset Big Energy, he's upset the insurance companies, and he is under siege. And nobody came for him. The Speaker of the House asked for us to come in and knock on some doors for him, and we went and did that. But Michelle, I think that my analysis of what's happening and why it's happening is more granular than the aerial view that some people who sit higher atop the political hierarchy, where they are from where I sit. I'm always talking to voters, constantly talking to people, and they're saying to me what's in the top tier in the triage of their concerns. Are saying at the top. So I think the writing was on the wall in Virginia for a very long time. There are things that we know about how this works, what happens in off years, but I do not believe this. I think it sounds very smart, but I do not believe that McAuliffe answered what people were asking for. He ran against Trump. I think the people who were supporting the Republican in this race responded very handily to Trump rhetoric. I don't think it's gone anywhere. I think the face has changed. I think that we, on our side, have Trump fatigue, but I passed people talking about Nazis wearing masks on the way in to Lawrence. And so I say, if we're not careful, we're going to continue to watch the larger arcs and miss the signals that are coming from where the pain is. And the closer you get to the pain, the more accurate your analyses are going to be, the more accurate your predictions are going to be. We're still missing it.
Closer to the paint. That's one for Facebook. That's a quote for Instagram. Staying close to the people who are making the decisions in the voting booths. But I think what's interesting is we've talked about the role of candidates in bringing out voters and campaigning against Trump and all of that. But we haven't really dug into the issues. We've dug into the issues that brought out Republican voters, but we had an interesting phenomenon happen in in Virginia also with Winston-Salem. She was elected the first Black woman, LG, in the state of Virginia, but she was a Republican who was endorsed by the NRA and was endorsed by Trump, and she was able to secure a win, a tight win. It was 49 to 50 within a percentage point of her competitor to go ahead and pull that race home. And so when we think about candidates versus issues, what are the real drivers bringing out voters, and how can Democrats, and Tezlyn and Abbie, I will bring this to either one of you, how can Democrats either lean into issues or the right candidates to possibly see wins in 2022?
Well, I think we saw education continue to be a top issue among voters, particularly as it was an off-year election. But there was also a lot of talk, particularly on the right, about inflation and how those real kitchen table issues were affecting voters. And I think that was an issue of fear, the fear of what is to come. And Republicans were really good about capitalizing on that in contrasting their local races with the federal government and the real failure of Congress and President Biden to address this issue in a way that they felt was adequate. So those were what I saw as the top two issues this cycle. To be determined if those continue forward into the 2022 election, but I think we can anticipate that they will, given Congress's inability to get their act together.
Yeah, Michelle, I'm so glad you brought that up because that was the next point I was going to speak on because you have mentioned several times about Black women that did well and how those races, a lot of the races you mentioned were progressive. But it's important to remember that, again, a Trump endorsed Black woman won lieutenant governor. And so when we talk about Republicans and strategy, they understand strategy. Although Youngkin was not. Saying I'm endorsed by Trump. Guess what? The lieutenant governor was. She picked up the slack for the Trump voters, not just for those issues, but a lot of the rhetoric. It was rhetoric as well, dog whistles that Trump voters heard loud and clear. White women voted, non-college educated white women voted in droves to secure the Republican seat for both of these candidates, the lieutenant governor as well as governor. People don't just go vote for just one person. They vote for the governor and the lieutenant governor. So both sides of the coin were played, being able to say, hey, you know, we have diversity on the ticket. We have a Black woman that's running. She's a former veteran. She's all of those things. I commentated as an independent on Fox News for 6 years. I understand though that conversation very well. And Ms. Presley is right when she says that people are tired of the Trump fatigue. Yes, on the left they're tired, but they are not tired on the right. They welcome it. They want to hear familiar language. You don't necessarily have to say I'm endorsed by Trump, but if you talk about all of the issues that is important to him, those voters, they hear that. There was also something else mentioned about being close to the ground and not what the higher ups are talking about. And she's absolutely right when you mentioned that, because one of the things I started in 2011 is called Concrete Roots. And it's even deeper than just the grassroots. I ask panelists, when I get on cable news and talk to people, I can tell that I'm the only one that's ever been to the hole in the wall, if you even know what the hole in the wall. So right now, and for those who don't know, that's usually a club or a place that you go where you're not holding your pinky up in the air. Those are the people that decided not to vote. And although we're having all of these conversations on who voted and how we got folks out, there's very little conversation about why Black voters didn't show up. Let's call a thing a thing. Virginia was lost last night because Black voters decided that they would not come out in droves and save this republic. And white women decided that they were going to come out, non-college educated white women decided that they were going to put Republicans in office. And it's not because Black people were lazy. It's not because they just didn't get it. They just didn't understand. It's because the consultants and those who are in charge, they don't understand those Black voters. They talk in circles. They go round and round. They think, oh, well, if we just scare everybody and say, ooh, bad Trump, boogeyman, that would do the trick. And that just simply did not happen. Trump was not on the ballot. That is not where they feel the most impact. They understand, the importance of getting Trump out. That's why they voted in 2020. But they have very little conversation with really trying to engage those voters. And I'm just going to be honest. The people who are in charge, the well-paid consultants that continue to lose over and over and over, they simply are just out of touch with those voters. It's not just about voting for Black women. It's not just about having great Black candidates or candidates because they're Black. Because again, look at the Virginia lieutenant governor. She's Black. So it is about policy. It is about who you identify with. It is about who is speaking to your issues. That era of just voting for somebody because of they're Black and they're a woman, that's already been accomplished twice with Barack Obama and Vice President Harris. And even now, people are disappointed, even in Vice President Harris, for not being able to continue to have the necessary conversations that this base wants to have. Civil rights leaders went to this administration in January, was very clear about the things that Black people are asking for: voting rights, passing the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. No one asked President Biden to create a self-imposed deadline. He did. And those things were not done. Not only were they not done, it wasn't even addressed on how it could be done. This is a real issue, and you cannot have a coalition, a Barack Obama coalition that they keep trying to repeat over and over and keep failing without having all of these groups in the fold. I knew that Trump was coming in 2013 when I helped elect Regina Hill in Orlando, Florida. First time ever running, first time commissioner. She had been arrested 21 times. Yes, folks, 21 times. She had a felony. She went against a 16-year attorney incumbent and she won. She was reelected last night for the third time. So when you have these type of candidates that get on the ground and do the work, and they're engaged in their communities, not just at the meetings and the sit around and talk about, what we think we know about politics, but what you have actually lived and experienced. When you can have those conversations and connect with those voters, those are the ones that go to the polls. And so the Democrat Party is going to have to learn, including the Republican Party as well, if they want to ever expand their base, to get off their high horse and to stop thinking that they know everything about voters, because the voters are showing you exactly what you do not know.
There's definitely to be something to be said about the role of issues in campaigning. When I think about what happened in Missouri in 2018 with races in Missouri at the top of the ballot and issue races, a number of issues that you would never think would pass in Missouri passed. Medical marijuana, raising the minimum wage, and campaign finance reform. But the candidates who would embody those policies, champion those policies, and advocate for those policies were not elected. Even if you look at Winston's platform issues, I thought they were very interesting when she talked about the issues she would advocate for as a lieutenant governor. Everything from creating a Black Virginians advisory cabinet to the governor, to startup incubators to support Black business owners, to preserve truth in sentencing, different boards. Her issues, if you looked at them on their surface, were issues that seemed to align with the issues that Black people find to be very important. So I thought that was an interesting dynamic to see Virginia elect a Black woman, LG, who was a Republican, a Trump endorsed candidate with the NRA, but also had issues on her platform that Black people in general would support. If you are watching us on YouTube, feel free to drop your questions so that you can join in on the conversation at dolequestions.edu. I'm going to bring it back to Abbie and Donna in particular. There were comments made about there being Trump fatigue, but also that Congress needs to get its stuff together, and that maybe people are tired of what they're seeing in Congress. Did the recent and over the last year or so, the policies that have or have not been passed, the work of Congress between both chambers and the president, did any of that have any effect on what we saw in Virginia and across the country in elections last night?
My perception would be that voters have certainly lost confidence in President Biden and the Democratic Party and their ability to get anything done. Donna articulated really well how we saw microcosms throughout the country during this election of liberals fighting against progressives, fighting against Democrats, and a real divide. And it made me think a lot about the days of the Tea Party and how the Republican Party was unable to overcome that at that period of time. And, so the degree to which things happening in Washington affect state elections is certainly debatable, but I do think that national politics always plays a role in informing where voters are at and how they cast their ballot. As we look ahead to 2022, the question then is, does that get replicated in the other 48 states that have elections outside of New Jersey and Virginia? And New Jersey and Virginia are just really unique states, not only because they have these off-year elections, but because of the political composition of those states. So we know that traditionally Virginia was a red state. It had been trending purple. There was a belief that it had gone blue, and this election has disproven that fact. It is still very much a purple state, and there's a lot of work to be done on the ground with, I believe Donna was talking too about microcosms of voters, right? It's not enough to just talk broadly about your ideas, but you really have to dig in with individual groups of voters and making sure that as an elected official, you're meeting their needs.
And Donna, I will go ahead.
Individual voters really getting down into what people are asking you for. When we went into Ward 4, which is a high concentration of African American voters, the crime in the North End, as it's called, is completely out of control. And I came in, this PAC was already having these conversations about question 2, which was the public safety amendment in Minneapolis that said that we should abolish and defund the police. And at some point, Black pastors put their foot in the door and said, hey, no one has talked to us. And so the Black pastors came in and they said, this is not what the people of the North End asked for. So here you have a PAC, well-funded by organizations, the ACLU, the Color of Change, people who stock and trade. These organizations, it's their stock and trade to have their thumb on the pulse of what's happening in these communities. It's their job to understand where the issues lie. And they came in and they said, yes, we're going to defund and abolish the police. And Black people said resoundingly. It was in our consultant meetings, in all of the conversations that we were having, Black people kept coming to the fore and saying, we didn't ask for this. What we asked you for was for the police to police us the way they police white communities. We did not ask you to abolish the police. This is not our language. This is not our thinking. And so again and again, I mean, that was another place where, as an organizer, because I'm also a community organizer, I founded the only Black Lives Matter chapter in Florida that was connected to the national network back in 2014. So we've led literal thousands of people through the streets. But when we sit down to talk to people, we don't hear that we've lost faith in Biden. We hear that Biden was given to us and that we didn't have other choices, right? People are not saying, there was no point where we thought, glory be, this is the candidate that we've dreamt of, right? Said no one, right? And so, and so if we've lost the faith, I would ask the question, did we ever have it, right? Like, is this what we asked for? And so I think I'm talking in circles because I've been on a campaign since August 9th and I haven't been off, and I apologize for that because usually I'm a little more clear. But again and again, we are parroting each other without really doing the work. And so one last thing I'll say. The other thing that we knew when we went into Minneapolis is that we knew that Ward 13, which sits on a Lake Henrietta, and it's very beautiful and it's very well-resourced. We'll just call it well-resourced. And this community, we knew in our consultant conversations and from our pollsters, we knew that as go Ward 13, so goes Minneapolis. And yet, we went down into Ward 4, and we went and talked to the Somali community and the Hmong people in those wards, and they said again, this is not what we asked for. So we already knew who supported the amendment, we knew who didn't, and we knew who was funding it, and we knew that Black people and the people who are marginalized in Minneapolis hadn't asked for it. And if we could take the lessons that we learned there, the lessons that we learned about education in Florida, the lessons that we learned about public refuse in St. Louis County in 2014, and really start to listen and respond and have candidates that reflect the zeitgeist of our times. We're not talking about rent control right now. And that's the next cliff that we're going to fall off of. And you don't hear any of our pundits, you don't hear people talking about it on CSNBC, you don't hear them talking about on MSNBC or on CNN. But that's the next looming crisis along with climate.
Well, you've taken yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to that was such a great, I know you got your questions lined up, but I just wanted to piggyback on that because Donna made an excellent point. And just to kind of expound on that, Donna's absolutely right. No one is saying, oh yes, we really just had so much faith in Biden. It certainly was the lesser of the two evil on the ground. And I keep stressing again because there's a lot of conversations that people have with voters, technical voters, those who are in band, those who are super voters. I spend time talking to people that do not vote. And those individuals are never looked at, not questioned, not asked. Why is it that you can have one of the elections I was looking at last night, over 700,000 registered voters, and only 2,000 people actually went to the polls? All of the consultants, all of the money, all of the resources always goes into talking to how do we get those 2,000 people to the polls? It's never about expanding the base. And when you talk about expanding the base, that is really where the going back to when the last time you've been to the hole in the wall, or is it just sitting up in a room with consultants and thinking that you have it all figured out? When you talk about expanding the base and why people have given up and lost faith, it's not that they've lost faith in Biden, they've lost faith in this government. And I have to be clear again, as someone that worked with the George Floyd family and how this entire Democrat Party used that as one of the catalysts for their campaign in 2020, and to flat out lie, to flat out say that I look Gianni in her eyes, and I am going to make sure that police reform passes by the year anniversary. People were disappointed in that, not in a way that they expected him to be a savior to end all racism, to end all police brutality, but it was a flat out lie. And people are disappointed. People are pissed off. Let me just be clear. I don't want to say disappointed. I want to say that people see it directly in front of their face, that someone told me one thing and then another thing happened. And so when you mirror that over and over, and I keep going to black voters, and I apologize if that feels that it's excluding anybody, because that's not my goal. I do commentate on the Black News Channel. I speak specifically about black issues. So I point this out because it's being consistently ignored. 90% of black people vote for the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party cannot win without black voters. At the beginning of President Biden's administration, he said flat out, I owe you black people. I owe you. President Barack Obama didn't even say that. So when you say I owe you, and it's not that they expected him to be a savior, but when you say I owe you, and then you sit down and you have meetings with civil rights leaders, and that meeting tape leaks to the black community, you now have voter depression, combined with voter suppression, with all of the things that are going on the right to ensure that people don't have the right to vote, in addition to all of the things that are not happening in Congress, in addition to one thing after the other, Vice President Harris saying, oh, America's not a racist country. These are the things that people are talking about on the concrete route. Not the grassroots, not the organizations, but on the concrete streets, in the hood, in the projects, in the clubs, in the areas that none of these consultants ever go. And we're missing, going back to Regina Hill's race, that is exactly why she won. She went and talked to those who have never been spoken to. She went and woke up Lazarus. And those are the ones that brought her to the polls, because she identified with that. And there are hardly ever any consultants in the room to have that conversation, because it's so much easier to get 2,000 people to the polls and focus on 2,000 rather than educate 600,000.
Well, we saw a similar model of expanding the vote with Stacey Abrams' race in 2018, and although she wasn't able to bring home the win on paper, she was able to essentially till the soil and lay the groundwork for wins that we saw in Georgia in 2020 and 2021. With that being said, you mentioned something very interesting and made me think about the state of Congress and the administration as it stands, in that Democrats have the House, the Senate, and the presidency by very thin margins. When we look forward to 2022 and the midterm elections, there will essentially be a fight by Dems to keep that margin and or expand that margin, and fights from the Republican side to possibly take some of those seats and go for the majority. What are going to be the issues, and I'd like to start with Annie, that Republicans will need to focus on in order to win the majority in the House or Senate in 2022?
What we know from this discussion today, Michelle, is that retail politics are back. Wholesale is out. You can't just get a group of people and say, are you a Republican? And they're going to vote Republican. You can't just say, are you a Democrat? And you can vote. You can count on them to vote for a Democratic candidate. Now it's retail. You actually have door-to-door. You know, New Hampshire is really good at this door-to-door politics. They literally knock on the door and ask for the vote. And they bring people from all over the country. We flew in Jeb Bush for George W. and a bunch of Floridians with strawberries and oranges in their ski suits, and went door to door. This is back. And what we've all talked about are topics that are very important to certain groups of people. Mm-hmm. And these candidates and their campaigns and their consultants have to figure out where those groups of people are, what they want to hear, and how you're going to solve the problem. Because you still got to solve the problem if you get elected. Otherwise, you don't get reelected. It's pointed out very clearly that it doesn't. If you don't make it work, then you're out, and the next guy gets a chance. So what we know is that there are probably 10 issues that are super hot, and they're only hot to certain people. And there might be 3 issues I care about, and there might be 4 issues that you care about, and they're different. Right. And you might have a couple that are really important to you. Some people are just one issue, and all of this is going on right now, and there's not a single way to solve it. You have to get out and literally do the retail. So what we know is that the Trump is going to be an issue. And as much as I like you, Tezlyn, I have to tell you, as a moderate Republican, the Trump fatigue with my crew is strong. There is no doubt there's Trump fatigue. Now, there are still crazy right conservatives, but it is real in the Republican Party, and certainly everybody else who has to listen to it. Immigration, climate change, the finishing up of COVID, we have abortion, we have inflation, we have education, we have how you're going to do defunding police, public safety, and certainly global security. We got to pay attention to China. We got to pay attention to Iraq and Iran. There are things going on internationally that are issues, particularly for corporations who are trying to build businesses and create new jobs. So there are all kinds of individual issues now that candidates have to pay attention to and speak particularly to those people. And I think that's probably the single biggest aspect of consultancy, which I have done, that people are slow to catch on to, and it's particularly apparent with the pollsters who appear to get it wrong almost every time.
Makes you wonder why we keep doing polls.
Right.
They're
I
expensive.
never have understood it really. But that's what I think is happening, is that we have to now talk to people who are interested in very specific topics. So that education topic in Virginia really made all the difference. That was the one thing that he was able to say consistently that he wanted to address that caught everybody's attention, and here they came to vote. So that's the lesson I think we've learned from this last maybe 5 years in politics, and now it's really getting serious.
Yeah, and if I could just respond, since you mentioned me, I certainly, if you work in that space, you are certainly more close to the voters, the Republican voters than I am. What I was speaking of when I said the Trump fatigue is not obviously not an issue because of Trump. I'm speaking based on facts. A Trump endorsed candidate won last night in Virginia. And so she was very clear about her association with Trump. She talked about Trump. She was endorsed by Trump. So although I do respectfully understand that you're saying they're tired of hearing it, I don't even disagree that they're tired of hearing it. Again, I was a commentator on Fox News for 6 years. None of the conservatives liked when people brought up Trump and the bad things about Trump, because it made people have very uncomfortable conversations, just like what we see with critical race theory. So yeah, the fatigue is there. Let's stop talking about Trump. Let's just move on. Let's just talk about the issues. But there are still individuals that still respond to those issues and to those values. And I would even say, being an independent, I don't think they should be running against Trump. I think it's a dumb idea. I thought it was a dumb idea to do it when they did it, because I know that that's not sustainable. So I agree that the issue should not be running against Trump, because Trump is a symptom to the problem. There will always be Trump proxies that come along the way, which we see with the lieutenant governor that they elected. But when we say that the fatigue is there on the Republican side, I think we probably disagree on why that fatigue is there. People want to move on and go on to the next issue and not pause and stop and talk about why are we even having this conversation about Trump. And that's why critical race theory was such a polarizing thing, to not talk about race. It's always more comfortable for people to not talk about it and move on than it is for people to talk about it. But I will also say this issue that we're seeing in the Democrat Party or Democrat left side has been going on way before Trump ever got in office. I've been saying the same thing on radio, on television for the last 10 years plus. It happened when Barack Obama in 2010, when they lost the House and the Senate then. Organizing for America was rolled out all over the country in 2008. At the time I was in Florida, that was my political stomping ground. We only had one paid staffer in Florida, that actually was one paid black staffer in Florida. It was completely ignored. When I worked with Michele as the racial justice director for Bernie Sanders, they sent no one, absolutely no one, zero, zilch, national staff to Florida to engage black voters. So you see a result of what has happened over the last 10 years. Barack Obama got in, everybody got in with him in 2008, and he stayed in 2012, and everybody that got in with him, well, not everybody, I'm being extra when I say that, but quite a few people lost their seat because they all downloaded that manual. I saw it. I saw candidates all download the manual. Oh, because there literally wasn't organizing for those who work on the ground. There was literally an organizing for Obama, organizing for America manual. Do this digitally, say this, have this focus group, do that. And all of them did it, and a lot of them lost. Because again, they have no interaction on the ground, and they don't know how to speak to those voters. Donna, one of the things you talked about was black women in Florida and school choice. You are absolutely right. I talked about that on Fox News. I am a mother. I have a 14-year-old. School choice mattered to me. It absolutely mattered to be able to send her to a school that I feel she had a fair chance. At the time that I was saying it, I was fighting for the 13 women that were raped in Oklahoma City by Officer Hossclaw. So two things can be done. My point with that is two things can be done at the same time. I can have a value that's important to me that may lean moderate, that may even lean right to some, and at the same time be fighting a left progressive issue like the Officer Hossclaw case that raped 13 black women. Two things can be done at the same time. In Oklahoma City, I was living in an area that I didn't want my child to go to that school, so I drove across town to drop my daughter off at a school of choice. And that is what people do not understand on the ground. They simply just don't get it because they haven't engaged, they haven't had enough pain, or they have gotten through the pain and they took the Band-Aid off and they forgot about the wound, and they do not connect with those who are still hurting on the ground and what it means for them to give their child a fair shot. I can fight for $15 an hour, but I don't have any intention of making $15 an hour. I'm an Orlando Journal business owner winner twice. And I work for Bernie Sanders, and I'm not a socialist, not even close to being a socialist. Those are the type of conversations that we have to start having so we can see where we line up with values.
You know,
Well, and when we talk, go ahead.
I wanted to say three things. I want to try to get them in quickly. The reason why critical race theory is such a hot button topic right now is because it takes control of the conversation about race away from white people. So let's just be clear about that. When white people are in control of the conversation about race, we have very robust engagement. The moment that the conversation doesn't coddle the white guilt, then it becomes confrontational to a lot of white people. They feel unsettled or disorganized by that. So I just want to say that that's the reason why the Republicans have been able to use that, because it takes control away. And this is about making America great again. It's really a reclamation. And so critical race theory just neatly feeds right into that conversation. The other thing that I wanted to say is as we approach a plurality in the state of Florida, that is informing how we campaign. Well, it should. It's informing how I campaign. I can't speak for my comrades, right? It should inform how we campaign. As we approach a plurality, we have to talk to lots of different groups in different ways. So we're talking to Muslim Americans differently than we're talking to black entrepreneurs. And we're talking to single black mothers differently than we're talking to white women who have traditionally voted Republican but are actually pro-choice. Right? And they want to get off the pro-life bandwagon. So when we were in Pennsylvania, in Philly, we were talking to Republican women about their reproductive stances. And they were willing to vote with Amy Klobuchar, which is bringing them over to our side, which is why I supported Klobuchar, because I believed that she could capture white Republican women's votes. We have to be smart about this stuff. And so I don't want to give myself credit for being like this brilliant person or this like deep political thinker that can run paces around everyone else. But I do say that we are guilty of using very generic bans to type people as opposed to really listening, to really speaking into people's listening. Now, what I noticed about Republican organizing and its efficacy is this. If Republicans see black men are disgruntled about an issue, maybe it's returning after incarceration, the Republican organizers are having very deep conversations about, tell us what your issue is. Do you want to own a gun? Do you want to go back to school? Or are you not able to get a Pell Grant because of prior possession, simple possession charges? Could have been some sticks and stems in your pocket. Right now, this guy can't get a Pell Grant. And they're saying, hey, you know what? Vote with us, and we're going to help you get your life back. And so now black men are going off with the Republicans. They're talking to black single moms about school choice, and now they're willing to vote Republican. So they're joining this, verboten club of people who are crossing those lines. And one of the reasons that continues to happen is because they're willing to do the work of asking people what issues are important to them, and they're responding. Now, whether or not those things actually happen, whether or not black men get their voting rights back to the tune of 1.4, some people say as many as 1.7 people are off the rolls. Some people say, well, that's irrelevant. Most of those people are white. The numbers are all over the place. But there's over 1 million people that are not able to participate in the state of Florida because of past involvement with the criminal justice system. And all of our work, 60% of Floridians said, we don't want people to be locked out of society because they've had this interaction with law enforcement. And the red state house is still trying to figure out how to stop the people from having their say. So, what I will say is that the three things is critical race theory and why it challenges the public discourse, that as we approach a plurality, not just in Florida, because Florida's population reflects the population of the rest of the country, really should look to what has been effective in certain districts in Florida and utilize that nationwide. I'm about to go into New Hampshire, Arizona, Georgia, Eastern Pennsylvania, and New Jersey to confront some of the resistance to Build Back Better. And I believe that my politic going into 2022 is going to continue to be informed by the conversations that we're having on the ground with people about what's important to them. And in a representative democracy, what should always be first and foremost on any organizer's, any political's mind is what is the conversation on the street? What is it that what is important to people, not just the people who won't vote? Because really, the way that Obama became the president was he talked to people who were not interested in voting, and he got them excited enough to vote. And so as long as Democrats continue to go after, the playbook, guys, likely voters in districts that have traditionally high turnout, let's go talk to those people. If you're in any of these, if you're in your local DECs, this is what they're doing, right? But we have to bring more Americans into the room. And some of those people are going to be Republicans, and we're going to turn them. And some of those people are going to be Democrats, and you're going to turn them. But that's the work that has to be done. And if we don't do it, our country is going to continue to be more deeply divided. And I think catastrophe awaits us if we can't figure it out.
I think they're turning independent. I think there's a ton of movement to the middle.
Yeah, and then, but then we recruit those people. We say our whole entire strategy becomes to get the independents to come to one side or the other because we're still a two-party country.
Yeah, they haven't.
Well, I'm not doing it, Donna. I'm staying independent.
Well, Tezlyn says independents can't be convinced, or at least Tezlyn cannot be convinced to come to one side or the other. To go ahead and wrap this up, I'd love to get your forecast for 2022. We have a number of major races in the midterms, especially here in Kansas and Missouri. On the Kansas side, we have Governor Laura Kelly, who will be running for re-election, and members of Congress up for either re-election or seats that could possibly be taken both in the Senate and House. On the Missouri side, we have a Senate race that is starting to shape up, along with other state level races that will be important to what happens in 2024. From each of you, and I'd like to start with Abbie, what do you predict will occur in 2022, and what can voters expect to see?
Yeah, so I think Laura Kelly is going to have a really challenging re-election campaign here in Kansas. The Republican Party and the Republicans in the legislature have really stood against her at every single turn as it relates to the pandemic, and she's going to struggle to overcome that in what has traditionally been a red state. As we look to the congressional districts in Kansas, we have to go through redistricting first. That's never an easy process in the state of Kansas, given the manner in which we do it. It is highly likely that Laura Kelly may veto any maps that come from the Republican-led legislature if they aren't perceived to be fair. Certainly the individual that is most at risk in our congressional delegation, probably the only person, is Representative Sharice Davids in the Kansas City metro area. Although as I look at the maps, I really struggle to see, given the changing demographics of that district, a way of which they can write her out of Congress. I expect her to perhaps have a closer campaign than she did last time, but I expect her to win in the end.
Annie, what is your forecast and prediction for 2022?
Well, of course, Missouri has a big Senate race. Roy Blunt is retiring, and he started as clerk of the Greene County Court in 1975 and has spent most of his career in Congress, and of course is the third ranking Republican in Washington now. So he's really brought home the bacon, so to speak, for Missouri, and he will be missed. The unsettling of getting everybody in the primary identified, we've got a couple of congressional seats that are probably going to be in play as a result of folks deciding that they want to run for Senate. So that'll be curious. My gut tells me that the current Treasurer Derek Schmidt will be the guy who becomes the candidate for Senate and really have the best name ID going forward, and it will be highly contested and certainly one of the races across the country that will be watched. And as a result, the congressional races will be in play as well.
Donna, what are your predictions for 2022?
I think that if we continue on the path that I've seen, and I hate to be the catastrophist in the room, maybe I don't. I think that Republicans are going to win big around the country if we continue on our current trajectory. I think states to watch for movement between now and then, the type of people who will be casting their lot is Pennsylvania, particularly the eastern side. I would look at Arizona. I think we're going to lose a lot of ground in states like Georgia that showed up big for us and for Biden. I think that the way that people jump ship in Florida to risk a Senate majority, to have their moment in the sun, proves that as younger people who are more interested in being famous, move into political arenas where it used to not be fun to be famous, that's going to challenge our collective ethos. We saw some of that in 2016 where people came in and they were like, it's the me show. I don't think we need more of that, we need less of that. But as the Congress and Senate gets younger, I think that's going to continue to be a challenge. I believe that the consultant class is taking a beating around the country. For the obvious reasons, as inflation goes up and people tire of the gig economy and the employers, large employers, big boxes dig in and don't want to pay a living wage to younger workers who are entering the workforce or just starting families or want to start families. There's going to be some generational chafing there that's going to contribute to some ugliness in elections and around the polls and who decides to announce their candidacies. I think that the folks who announce their candidacy will be younger. A lot of them will be untried. Many of them will never have served in any office before. Many people will not have college degrees and these pedigrees that you see that are so impressive, the Ivy League schools. This is, I think, like the great unraveling of American politics, but there's so much opportunity in it, and I think it's a wonderful time to be alive.
Yes, it's the most wonderful time of the year when elections roll around. I have to agree with that. And last but not least, Tezlyn, what are your predictions for 2022 and what can we expect to see on the elections front?
Yeah, it's okay, Donna. You don't have to be the only bearer of bad news. I will go even further and say it'll be a slaughter. I'm okay with, being the bearer of bad news. It will be a slaughter for the Democrat Party. That's just the reality, and it's been a reality for a long time coming. This has been a wonderful panel, and I agree also with Ms. Presley when you said that people are becoming independent, and I just want to take a moment to explain what that means to me. Being an independent, we are in a two-party country. You certainly have to vote for one party or the other, but what being an independent is to me is do not count on my vote. Do not just say that automatically automatically, because you think I'm a black woman and I vote Democrat each and every single time, that is the way that my life is shaped out to be at that particular moment. My life has changed. I've been in the military. I've graduated college. I've had a child. I've been married. I've been divorced. Life changes, and so does my ideology. So people are becoming more independent now in states like Florida, where it does matter if you are registered as a Democrat or Republican. I get the mindset of you need to be one or the other, or we miss that voter, because more than likely it's going to be pulling teeth to get them to register independent and then register back as a Democrat. But in states like Texas, where you do not have to register with one party or the other, and you get to decide whatever party you want to be in the day of voting, even in it's an open primary race. Those are the type of things that I'm talking about when we're talking about filling out these polls, when we're talking about working with consultants. The consultant class is taking a well-earned beating, but it's a beating that they've been asking for. Like my mama used to say, you asked for this for a very, very long time, not just now, but for years and years and years. It has been in the making, because they have refused to listen to the issues and apply what it is that people are telling them that they want to see. This includes on the Republican class as well. I did an hour-long podcast yesterday with Sonny Johnson, who is a conservative who has been screaming, yelling, begging for conservatives to bring more black people in the fold. But she is not uplifted within that party, because she is not the prototype of the black, quote-unquote, black conservative that you see on national TV that gets the support. So this is also an issue that is going on even on the Republican side, that is shunned, that is not talked about, because again, it is always so much easier to get the what is perceived the regular voter or the super voter, and no time spent on the voters that don't vote. And the time to spend on the voters that don't vote is now, not just 6 months before an election, but all year around. That's why I train thousands of people every month on my own free time to make sure that people have the tools that they need to run, because Donna is right. More of the individuals that don't have the college degrees, that don't have the pedicure, that don't, like I was talking about with Regina Hill, she did this in 2013. So when I saw Trump coming, I said, oh yeah, this groundwork has been laid for a minute. She goes live constantly on Facebook. She goes back and forth with people on social media. A lot of the clutch pearling that people couldn't stand about, some people couldn't stand about President Trump. I saw her do that at the local level. It's why local politics is so important to me. Nonpartisan seats for city commissioner, in many states it's nonpartisanship, city commissioner, county commissioner. What I have seen from those that do the type of work that I do is people are shifting their resources and their time to local races. And if there is the fear to lose that independent voter, whether it be Republican or Democrat, that is a good thing, because now the resources will be put into gaining those voters. Court those voters like you would on any other date. Don't just show up and ask me to marry you. Take me on a date, wine and dine, whisper something sweet in my ear, but actually deliver what it is you say you're going to deliver. And until they marry the voters, as the voters have married them, we're going to see more of the same. But in the next 12 months, you will absolutely see the result. And I hate to say that. I hate to be right. It's not that I want to be right just to say, I told you so, I was right. I'm not a part of that consultant class. It sickens me, because my community is affected, and it hurts good candidates who are ballot down, good local candidates, because of the foolishness that you see on the federal level. So I don't want to be right, Michelle. I want people done right. And in order to do that, we have to remind people that the most effective change is at the local level, on your city level, your school board, and your mayor, and possibly your governor.
All right, well, I think we have a potential blueprint for moving forward. Court the voters, speak to their issues, speak to voters who you don't typically speak to, don't make assumptions about who's gonna come out and who you need to talk to. We need to check the consultant class and get ready for what may be gloom and doom, according to some of our panelists, in 2022, or at least a wild ride,
Can I say this one last thing? I'm sorry, I had it all in my head, but just as an example with the consultant class, and Michelle, you and I talked about this. There was a race, and I don't want to call the race out because I don't want to call any names, but you and I observed a race where the person got absolutely slaughtered. They lost handedly. That consultant, and I'm just speaking to this because Donna spoke about Philadelphia, that consultant that ran that campaign was able to immediately go get a job in Philadelphia, a swing state, working for the DNC. Something's wrong with that picture. It's not too many jobs where you get to fail miserably over and over and still get another job. This is why I say we have to do something about this consulting class. And Donna, I'm hoping that you'll be able to make a difference within your circle.
Yes, Donna, the charge has been put out to you to reform the consulting class, because it's one of the only professions where you can lose over and over again, find another job, and be highly paid. So with that, we will open the floor to questions. Any questions from the audience, and any questions that we may have received via email. The Student Advisory Board has been working diligently to ensure that this discussion series goes off very well, and we have a member of the Student Advisory Board who will be passing around the mic for questions for our panelists.
Specifically for Ms. Presley, but obviously other people are welcome to join in. So as for mentioned, the polls are not giving what they're supposed to be giving. And it kind of seemed that there was disagreement between you and also Ms. Figaro on what on Trump fatigue in the Republican Party. As a moderate Republican yourself, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you think that Trumpian Republicans are becoming the forefront of the Republican Party, or is it just a few loud voices? And also, what are the differences between moderate Republican issues that they care about and also Trump Republican issues?
Good question.
So always in politics, you've got 100% of the people. And the fringe edges are the really loud ones. And they've got fringy issues, and they speak very loudly, and they're pretty obnoxious. Everybody else falls closer and closer to the middle. I think the middle of the Republican Party is indeed growing. And it's in large part because the issues are starting to become more fluid. They're recognizing pieces of what has traditionally been Democratic issues that are more interesting. So I've always been fiscally conservative and socially moderate.
Right.
I continue to be fiscally conservative and socially moderate. So the pollster has to pick that up about me and anybody else who has certain issues that they care about. And this is what we talked about. Retail politics is so important now. Got to pick up those issues. The Trump fringers, if that's who you're talking about, I truthfully can't explain why they're so enamored, don't understand it. Some of the policies I was in favor of, but the way he presented them and the way he protected them and the way he took credit for the win last night in Virginia. He's just that guy. So he appeals to people, clearly, but they tend to be in that far edge of what is American politics. And I think there are a whole bunch of us who are trying to stay away from the edges. We're trying to do what's right for the most number of people. We're trying to get the kids so they can read by third grade. We want everybody to have clean, healthy housing. We want people to be happy and working and moving forward. This is what America's about. Mm-hmm. It's not this fringy stuff that everybody gets all worked up over and takes all the airwaves. Does that answer your question? Thanks. I got a little rant there.
I co-sign that.
The rant? You
Yes,
like the rant?
I like the rant.
See, there we go. We can be friends. Here's another question right here. A couple up here.
This has been a great session. You've talked about political issues, doom and gloom, projections in the future. I wonder if you could talk about who you see as some of the women leaders who are rising in the future. You mentioned Amy Klobuchar, and I think of Kamala also. I also think of Governor Whitmer of Michigan, who seems to be really doing a nice job trying not to be kidnapped and so forth. Who are some of the women you see rising up in the next couple of years?
Well, there aren't very many on the Republican team. And truthfully, it's very, very difficult to rise in the ranks and be treated fairly. I will never forget the photograph of Sarah Palin on the front of Time magazine. And she was standing in a suit and tall heels on the front of the stage. And on any of those political events, there's a pit in front of the stage that's full of photographers, and then the TV cameras are behind. And that the cover of Time magazine was a still shot between her legs, under her skirt, to see the signage in the back of the room that said McCain Palin. Now, what woman wants to have that picture of her maid global? The idea that you would put up with that baloney, I mean, nobody wants that. Nobody in the right mind wants that. And so what happens? They don't run. They don't engage. They engage on issues. They maybe do school board. They'll try to do city council. But the idea that you're going to get to the top of the heap, it's not that appealing. And I think what we do is we just turn off so many women from the level of politics where we need them at the table, because and I really hate to be this person who says it, but there's just, the rules are different for men and women. And as a result, we're just not attracting enough women to participate. They try, they're out there, but it's just not working. So we need to really rethink how, I mean, what Time magazine was thinking, I don't know. I mean, it's a sad commentary on how the celebrity of politics has turned people into
Yes.
kind of desirous in a way that is meaningless to governing. It's just bizarre.
I like Klobuchar. I mean, I got to work with her for a year. I like the way that she presides over a state that is, it's blue in the center and like red on the outside, like a reverse, rare steak. And she is very, very smart. She's a brilliant woman. She's a brilliant strategist. She's a brilliant politician. And I can tell you that she has some of the finest policy folks in all of DC, and she's still the smartest person in the room, right? I like Val Deming in Florida. She was on the short list, if you'll recall, for VP pick. Her politics are a little bit to the right of mine, but I think that she, as a black woman, can work in Florida with those politics. I think that I'd like to look for some younger people who are younger than 50, to see if we can get some real representation for issues around family planning and being able to actually purchase a home. These are the things that our students in here tonight are thinking about. They're thinking about these student loans are going to be a yoke on their neck. And I'd like to see what younger women, conversations they're having around reproductive rights. We're waging unbelievable, 30 some odd years on, we're still waging that war. And so I think it's important that younger women who are still in their reproductive years are leading on those conversations. We've heard from older women, they have children, they understand the issue, they're women. But I think that hearing from women who are in their reproductive years is going to have it's going to give a different shape and texture to the conversation. So those are my two favorites right now, but I am older. I'm sure that younger organizers, consultants, et cetera, are going to have different names in their heads. I mean, nobody thought of AOC. My friend Jessie Ulibarri and New Leaders, they found her in the Bakken, during the protest. And so those young, unsung leaders are out there, because politics is getting really gray, right? Like, I'm older than you probably think I am. So, I'm closer to Nancy Pelosi than I am to these students, right? So I think that's what I think about. Those are my two favorites. I was not a fan of Kamala Harris because of what happened in California in the prison systems under her tour of duty there. She never seemed to really have developed a black consciousness. It was convenient during the campaign, but still, as a black woman, I stand with her and for the representation that she provides.
Yeah. If I could kind of speak to that, just because Donna, as you can tell, Orlando's my political stomping ground. So every time you say something about Florida, I feel some idea comes to my head. And this is just another example of I'm what you call an ex-millennial, where you're right on the cusp of being a millennial as well as Generation X. And when you spoke of Val Demings, this is another example of kind of what I was speaking to earlier, that to me it is very important to get women in office, but I am concerned with people that can actually connect to the community and have a conversation. Val Demings was one of the first people that I interviewed on my show when I moved to Orlando, Florida in 2007. Her and her husband, Jerry Demings, really great leaders that I've been able to mentor. But guess who's more connected to the community? Jerry Demings. He's the guy that keeps the rubber to the road. He's the guy that had his signs out. He's the guy that's shaking hands. Val Demings, who I have the utmost respect for, she was appointed to City of Police. When her and Jerry Demings ran, they ran on that Obama train that I talked about when he first got in, and he took a lot of folks with him. And she was strategically picked, if you will, by Nancy Pelosi. She came down to Orlando, Florida, and helped Val Demings win. She was never a grassroots person. She was never engaged on the ground. So although I am proud of her as a woman, I am proud of what it is she says that she represents, the reality is I always look at the results over the rhetoric. And so my generation, we are interested in seeing people that actually do the work. As bad as I want women in office, as bad as I want to see Black women be in office, I want the right Black women. I want the right women in office. I want to see the things that matter to my community. And she has, and I just don't know any other way to say it. She has earned her position, no doubt about it. But when you talk about really having that concrete roots, that grassroots connection with the people, it is really actually her husband who is now the sheriff of Orlando, Florida. So that just gives some context to, yeah, all of our answers are going to be different when we see women leadership and what that means. She checks all the boxes in Florida. You are absolutely right. She runs great in Florida. She's moderate, former police. She's going to do the tough on crime. She's going to bring the liberal. But watching from on the ground on who best connects with me, I don't know if that was her. And so her race is coming up, which I don't believe she'll be running for Senate, by the way. I believe that she announced that, and I don't think she's walking away from her seat. And from my understanding, I think I'm going to be right on that. But there are some other folks who are running for this seat, about 3 or 4 that I know, that I think will make fantastic leaders in Congress that can actually bring the voice of the people from the street and not the political class.
I like Ayala too.
Yes.
Her politics are more closely aligned with mine, but I don't think she plays well in Florida. She hasn't.
She doesn't. She won't play well nationally either because she goes against the grain. So we agree. But we still can like her.
We like her.
Well, I think we spend a lot of time talking about who is in Washington, D.C., but the fact of the matter is a lot isn't getting accomplished in Washington, D.C. If you want to look at where real politics affects your lives, you need to look at local elections, and there are some really stellar women mayors across this country that I think have a really bright future in front of them. I'm thinking about London Breed out in San Francisco. Who knows what, maybe you all know what Keisha Lance Bottoms is doing next, but she didn't run for re-election in Atlanta, and I think she has real potential on the national stage as well.
I think we have to mention Tashara Jones out in St. Louis, who also was recently elected mayor of St. Louis and is the first Black woman to serve in that capacity. But one of her first charges was criminal justice reform, and I think day one she passed criminal justice reform policies after getting elected to office. So I think we can all agree that it's not enough to be a woman, it's not enough to be a person of color or Black, but it's who is going to advocate and champion your issues to create the change that you voted them to go into office and do work on behalf of. Who is going to work on your behalf? Because elected officials and public servants work for you. Well, with that, if we don't have any more, go ahead.
Just one last tag on that, as you're summarizing. I hope people also see the difference. This has been a great panel between folks that we know can win versus who we like. Because I hope folks are picking that up, because those are two totally different conversations. When I'm consulting candidates, I'm not going on what I like or what I think you should or how. So there's two conversations that I hope people are picking up, and all of us, I think, have done a great job of speaking from the voter standpoint of how I feel as a voter versus who I know can win. And so just going back to that point, Val Demings is the one that has more of a chance to win than Ayala, but it doesn't mean that we don't like Ayala and would not want to see an Ayala be successful. So I love when those two worlds come together and people realize that, there's two conversations, and you have to look at what the reality is versus, you know, what you would want the reality to be. And so we fight to change the reality, but in the meantime, as consultants and operatives, we still have to work within reality. So
I'd like to bring your attention to Fentress Driscoll, who is a state house rep in Florida, Polk County and parts of Hillsborough. She's a Harvard-educated woman. She's doing amazing things in education advocacy. Hard to get anything done in Florida State House, right? I can't stand Tallahassee. Whenever I get sent up there, I feel like I'm being punished. But, but look her up, Fentress Driscoll, Polk County, dubbed very not nicely the meth capital of Florida. Grady Judd, evangelical preacher, delivers a sermon in the pulpit with his full uniform and gun on his hip every Sunday morning. It's something that it's almost like a dystopian comedy, right? And so you can't make this stuff up. And then she's sitting there, just this presence of balance and sanity and brilliance. And I see her quietly casting her name into the pool for governor 2024 in Florida. My mouth to God's ears.
well, that's good because Governor he does not need to run again. Just to put that out there. That's I don't know, why do we do that, Donna? They pick the easiest. Oh, let's just run him again. Let's bring him out the box. He won that time, even though he's been a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, and he switches up every 2 years. This is another example of let's find good talent and let's stack the bench instead of just going back to what we think we know, because obviously we don't know much at all.
I had this exact conversation with someone like, I don't like to use the word identity politics because I don't want to give a nod to groups of people who think that representation doesn't matter. It absolutely matters.
Absolutely.
It matters. But as long as we are bringing people into the room and their space in our collective leadership spaces are solely rooted in their identities, I think this is probably not the right way to go. And I said, so someone said, well, what do? You have all of these white men that are ready to lead, and then you have people who want to lead and who should be leading, but who require a certain amount of training, initiation into the culture of leadership in politics. So what do? I said, well, for every white man that is capable, you put a black woman next to him. For every 50-year-old that is capable, you put a 21-year-old right next to them. And so what you're doing is you're creating that diversity, equity, inclusion that you want to see 10 years from now without tokenizing people. And you're giving people an opportunity to enter spaces that they are traditionally underrepresented. And you're doing that now for the world that you want to see, the shape that you want to see the political scene in America. We have to do it. We're approaching a plurality, not just in Florida, but in the country. And if people don't feel represented and seen, that's going to be another problem that we'll have to face. And that's some of the reason why we have some of this fringe stuff going on, is that we've left a lot of people out of conversations.
Yeah, I mean, that's the strategy Republicans use. They put a to run as a lieutenant governor. I mean, so even though that didn't play to the issues that we may agree with, that's what they did. That's why all of the talking heads, the right-wing talking heads, are saying, hey, how come you guys aren't talking about the new lieutenant governor? Even though some of us may say she's being tokenized, the point is, I totally agree with you, Donna. Let's have strategy and have young and old and black, because I want to be clear that I understand representation matters as well, too. I just want people to not land solely on representation and understand that it's representation and how you represent us, two of those things.
You don't have a 90-year-old woman on TV talking about your uterus.
Right.
I think that's a perfect way to sum up the entire conversation. You want the right people in the right place to represent the right issues. And we've seen that not happen at the level that it needs to. There's a reason why women get upset when you see all white men making decisions about reproductive rights and the bills and legislations that goes with that. And with that, we could have this conversation for another hour and a half, 2 hours, which is a telltale sign that this discussion has been very fruitful and robust. And I am so thankful for my panelists for joining me today. If we could give them a round of applause for taking the time out of their schedule to join us. Tezlyn Figaro, Donna Davis, Annie Presley, excuse me, and my good friend, Abbie Hodgson. Thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate the conversation. I have to give a big thank you to the Dole Institute of Politics for all of the work that they put in over the last 7 weeks to make this discussion group possible. The staff, every single staff person at the Dole Institute is someone I have been engaged with and involved with throughout this process as we work to pull the logistics together and to make this work seamlessly. Thank you to all of you for your efforts. I want to thank the SAB for all of their efforts, the Student Advisory Board for pulling together all of the information, logistics, meetings, classroom visits, handing out the mic at every session to make sure we get those questions answered. And last but not least, I'd love to thank Bill Lacey again for his vision and work to ensure that the Midwest has the premier Institute of Politics, and that women like me, experts, consultants, and women and people, Black women with a different perspective, have the platform to share that expertise with the community and the KU community. Last but not least, I want to thank Van Gogh. Van Gogh is an art-based social service agency that employs at-risk youth, 14 to 24 years of age, to make public works of art that are sold in the community. Van Gogh commissioned a piece of artwork. A young artist by the name of Jafia commissioned a piece of artwork. He created and painted a chair that would go in line with our exhibit that we have at the Dole Institute, A Seat at the Table, paying homage to Shirley Chisholm and her work to bring a folding chair at the table if they don't give you a seat at the table. Jafia made a beautiful piece of artwork that was commissioned and paid for by the Dole Institute, and I want to thank him for his efforts and the Dole Institute for providing him that opportunity. Today's discussion and every other discussion in the series is made possible by the Newman's Own Foundation. Thank you for your generosity and for making this possible. If you'd like more information about Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet, you can visit us at www.shirleyskitchencabinet.org. It has been an honor. It has been a pleasure. I hope that you have learned. I hope that you have expanded your insight, and these discussions have been fruitful. I have enjoyed imparting my expertise and my experience and lending my friends, circle, and network to have these very robust discussions. Thank you very much.